All right, and we are live. Thank you for everyone for coming to this. What will be, I'm sure, will be a very informational event. We are here with the Avalara team for Playbook for Success, tackling tax compliance like a pro. Action team member Jason Nackstead. There will be time for questions at the end of our webinar after the demo. During the course of the event, if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and input those down at the bottom of your screen. There will be a ask question little icon down at the bottom. You can go ahead and put your questions in there, and we'll make sure those get taken care of. Before we kick it off to Evan from Avalara, I'd like to give a little background of our partnership with Avalara. Action partnered with Avalara to deliver a tax compliance solution that extends the value of the investment you've made in your Infor ERP software. Avalara seamlessly integrates with Infor Distribution ERP software, including Cloud Suite Distribution, SX, Fax, and A+. And we realize that a lot of you are coming from all over the country, so thank you for taking time out of your day. You are using, ERP such as Infor, CSD, A+, Fax, and SX, and we hope that this event will answer a lot of questions for you and help you make a move. So with that, I will send it off to Evan from Avalara. Evan, take it away.
Thanks very much, and appreciate everybody carving out the time to talk to us today. My name is Evan Owens. I'm the Strategic Alliance Manager. I'm responsible for our partnership with Action Associates, and that means doing fun things like these webinars and participating in trade shows and helping our partnership thrive. My colleague is Rich Creech, and Rich is a senior sales executive, so he's the gentleman that would actually spend time talking to customers that are interested in exploring our solutions, seeing a demo, learning more about the pricing structure and the different solutions that we bring to the table. Unfortunately, Rich is under the weather today. He normally joins me on these presentations, so I'm going to fill in for him. So sorry, you're stuck with only hearing me for the next 20 or 30 minutes. So our agenda today is tackling compliance, challenges of tax compliance, and a winning playbook for compliance. Just a quick story about Avalara. For those of you, you've probably seen us at some trade shows and things of that nature. Usually you can spot us by our palm trees and bright orange clothes. But Avalara was started in 2004, and kind of the goal of the company at the time was we recognized that most opportunities to automate tax compliance were presented at the very top of the enterprise level only. They're very expensive solutions, highly customized, high requirement for maintenance, and they just weren't practical for most businesses to employ. So Avalara started their company building kind of in the mid-market to begin. They built a scalable cloud-based solution, and we've really focused on building integrations to all the ERPs and all the shopping carts and all the e-commerce platforms, shipping platforms, et cetera, available. Our whole goal was to just be available for every system, no matter which one you used, so that as your company grew and evolved, you would continue to be able to use our solution. And as you can see from the slide, we've grown quite a bit over these last almost 20 years. And I think one of the key things to take from this is just that because of our 20 years of experience and the vast number of customers that we've served, whatever complicated situation that you might feel your company has, whatever uniqueness that you think you might have as far as trying to manage these compliance situations, we've likely seen it before, and we likely have customers that look very much like successful using our system to offload that burden from their accounting department. So moving into tackling compliance like a pro, we'll use the example of football. If you're a fan of the sport and have paid attention for many years, this sport's changed a lot over the years, right? I think about when I was a kid and I watched these guys playing, the types of gear that they use, the face masks and the pads were very different than they are today. And let's be honest, the football players of today are much bigger, they're much faster, and they're much stronger than they were back then. And as a result, with all that change to the sport and all the additional capability and speed and performance that these athletes have created over the years, there's a compliance issue there in football, right? You have a lot of concern around head injuries. So you think about the concussion protocol that football players have now. You think about the improvements to gear, the more involved face masks, the innovation that they've had to do to try to keep the players safe as they've continued to get bigger and faster and stronger. And it's not so different in the tax automation world, right? Companies used to be much more simple. You sent salespeople out, met face-to-face with a customer, they signed an order, and we shipped them in a truck, and it was pretty straightforward. And now with e-commerce and the ability to do a business online, and the ability to do business remotely, the footprint of the average business is much bigger, and the weight of compliance is much heavier. And the same can be said for ERP when you think of the complexity of an ERP system these days and how much more the average ERP can deliver to your business than it could 5, 10, or 20 years ago. So when we think about the compliance effort for that process, there's some key factors that have to be taken into consideration, right? So if you're managing compliance yourself, you have the people, you have the people whose job it is to make sure that your business is compliant, that the rates that you put into your system are up to date. A lot of times we talk to companies where the person that's responsible for that isn't specially trained in that field. They just learned it on the job. You know, it became their job to do it, and maybe they're doing it quite capably, but it's not their area of expertise many times. You also have to manage a process, right? Because if you're, for example, for tax rates, if those have to be updated on a regular basis, you have to build a process to make sure that you don't forget to do that. If you're managing exemption certificates, you have to make sure that those are being updated correctly, filing returns, et cetera. We'll dig into more details, but processes have to be developed and maintained. There's also a cost. A lot of times companies believe that their current process is free, but anything involving human resources is anything but, right? So when you think about the cost of the resources, both from a software standpoint and human resources in order to remain compliant, companies are spending money. And then there's whatever technology is touched by that, right? And a lot of times there's multiple things in place, like ERP systems and billing systems and e-commerce systems and shipping solutions and supply chain management solutions and all sorts of things like that. So there's multiple elements that are affected. And when businesses think about moving to an outsourced or automated solution, these are some of the concerns that often come up. You know, you think about latency, right? Am I going to be able to get that data fast enough? Am I going to be able to get it, you know, at the point of transaction, or will there be a delay of any kind? Security, that's a big fear in the business world. I know that Avalara spends a lot of time trying to educate its employees on how to avoid phishing attacks and different things like that. And everybody's concerned about being the next news story around, you know, data security. There's uptime and reliability, right? We have to make sure that the solution is available at all times while you're in business, so that you're not concerned with being able to conduct business as you're used to, and then being able to integrate to all those various solutions. And so this is something that Avalara has tackled quite well, and you know, our solution is cloud-based and highly secure and able to integrate with all these different solutions, the ones that you're using today. So happy to talk more about that if you're interested in learning more about it. So let's jump into the challenges of tax compliance. In 2021, there were 123,000 rate and taxability updates in the United States and Canada. So tax rate refers to the actual tax rate. So like if you go to the store and you buy a football, they're going to charge you sales tax for that football, right? There's also taxability, and that is that a football isn't taxed the same rate as a bottle of Gatorade or a gallon of milk, right? So there's different rules around taxability. So between those two things, there were 120,000 changes, 23,000. Sales tax holidays, 131,000 updates for that. And with sales tax holidays are periods in time where a state might offer sales tax amnesty for a short period of time. One example would be back to school shopping. A lot of states will say, hey, we're not going to charge tax during these few days to give consumers a break when they're going and buying school supplies for their kids before they go back to school, so, or for clothes or whatever. So that's an example. So point is that that's a staggering number of changes that happen every year. And businesses that are managing their own sales tax compliance have to stay on top of all these different rates and rules when they occur. There are also over 13,000 unique sales and use tax jurisdictions. So that refers to specifically where the transaction occurs and what the rate is within that jurisdictional boundary. So, you know, you think there's 50 states and 5 of those don't charge tax, but within those states, there's county boundaries and there are city boundaries and there are special taxing jurisdiction boundaries, and all adds up to 13,000. And on this slide, here's a good example of the metro area of Denver, Colorado. We like to pick on this area because Denver, or Colorado in general, has a very complicated sales tax process. And so you can see here that there are a collection of 6 zip codes that surround the Denver area. And many companies, as a shortcut for tax compliance, will use zip codes. Seems logical, right? It's going to get you pretty close. You can look up the sales tax rate, punch in a zip code, and you're going to get a rate. The problem is that zip codes were developed for federal mail delivery, and there is no federal sales tax. So those codes have literally nothing to do with sales tax. They have 100% to do with making it easier for the post office to put mail in your mailbox. So when you look at these rates, you can see that those boundaries all overlap. And I don't think this slide has it. You have my apologies, but that actually those zip codes can often include as much as 6 separate tax rates that all have to be added up, and they vary based on where within that zip code the actual house or location is. So Avalara's tax rates are all based on rooftop accuracy, so they literally geotag the location, and that way only the boundaries or jurisdictions that are applicable are used for the tax calculation. So another thing that's happening a lot in the tax compliance world is just the digitalization. So, it wasn't so long ago that in order to be audited, a business would have to be visited by an auditor, and they would come and set up shop in their conference room and get into the files and start going through and figuring out where any discrepancies were. But this can be handled virtually now, and we're starting to see that more and more, where auditors can just ask you to deliver files electronically, and they can do it from a distance. And the bad news is that means that they can probably manage more audits in the same period of time than they would if they were having to be on site. We're also seeing more e-reporting of sales tax transactions, and that includes both filing returns, but also e-invoicing, which I'll touch on a later slide, and it's being mentioned here as well. So that's a trend that's begun in Europe. I don't know if trend is the right word, an evolution that's begun in Europe, where sales tax reporting is happening in real time, where businesses are being asked to collect and remit and report those taxes at the point of transaction instead of accumulating them all and sending them at one time. That's not applicable in the United States yet, but as it gets proven out in Europe, I would imagine that eventually we'll start to see that happening in the US. And then electronic tax file sharing. So just being able to share files electronically, and again, that has a lot to do with returns. So Avalara's winning playbook to tackle compliance. There are 5 key kind of pillars to managing tax compliance. The first one is just understanding where your business has to collect and remit. And I think this is probably the place where most businesses get tripped up. When I do these presentations live, I like to ask by show of hands, who's familiar with the South Dakota versus Wayfair ruling in 2018? That ruling is now more than 5 years old. I rarely see more than about 10% of hands go up. So I guess nobody can really answer by raising their hand on this call, but ask yourself, are you familiar with that? And if the only thing you get from today's call is that you don't yet know about that ruling, I implore you to Google it and find out if your company's built a strategy around it yet. But effectively what happened was, for decades, businesses were expected to register and file taxes in states where they had a physical presence. They had people there, they had warehouses there, they attended trade shows. Anything that physically tied you to a state would cause you to have to register and file. It would be the creation of what the term would be nexus. And South Dakota versus Wayfair put that whole thing on its head and said that you could be found to have nexus based on your economic activity. And that economic activity varies by state, but in most of them, it's $100,000 in gross sales. And when I say gross sales, that means even if the customers are tax exempt, it still counts towards that threshold. So we could do a whole half-an-hour presentation just on Nexus and South Dakota Wayfair and the implications of that. If this is leaving you scratching your head at all, at the end, there'll be a way to reach out. We have some free resources available to help you figure out whether or not your business has been impacted by this ruling. And if it's been ignored to this point, I encourage you to do your research and find out, because it's where a lot of people get tripped up. But once you know where you have Nexus, the next step is to get registered in those various states, right? Make sure that you're registered, make sure that you're on their filing calendar, and that you're collecting the correct tax rates where applicable. Next would be calculating accurate tax rates. And as we just discussed, there are thousands and thousands of changes and thousands of boundaries to keep up on. But however you're managing that process today, getting the accurate rate for that transaction is essential. Tracking refers to the exempt sales. I'm talking probably to manufacturers today, and a lot of you might be going, hey, you know what? Tax rates aren't a huge problem for us. Most, if not all, of our customers are exempt. But if that's the case, exemption certificates become essential. So managing that process around tax exemption collection and storage is a very important part of that strategy. And then ultimately, paying to the states, right? Don't keep it. Whatever you do, don't keep it. But once you've got the funds collected, you have various filing periods, and the states expect you to fill out a return and submit those funds to them. So here's kind of a view of Avalara's Compliance Cloud. It's a little bit of a complicated slide, but if you look at the bottom, it starts with the integration, right? How are we going to get our systems to talk to each other? And that can be handled through an integration, which, as was mentioned at the beginning of the call, we already have pre-built and we have customers using for A+, Fax, SXE, and Cloud Suite Distribution. There are also APIs that some customers, if they have homegrown systems or homegrown e-commerce systems, things of that nature, they can write APIs that will talk to our systems. And then there's the experience and delivery of that content. And then the next level is the content, right? We have over 100 people whose job it is to make sure that all of the rates and rules and boundaries and laws are accurate and up to date. So we have all the tax content there, which lists all the different rates and rules. We have all the product content and all the rules around compliance in general when it comes to when the dates are applicable and what has to be reported. Then we have our actual layer of applications. We have our calculation application, which does the actual calculation of the transaction. We have returns and reporting for filing returns and reporting on all the sales that you've got that were, in regards to tax. The exemption certificates are the documents. Licenses, we can help customers get business licenses, whether it's for tax reporting or for other business requirements. And then we have a number of tools built around just assembling intelligence around your business and the products that you sell, and be able to substantiate your decisions when it comes to your compliance. And then at the top layer of that, you're looking at all the different business segments, regions, and industries that we serve. We have a lot of experience in many different industries through our years of serving customers. So research is an important element, and this has really grown a lot. Avalara had an acquisition about 3 years ago that expanded this offering quite a bit, and we have many customers that don't have the need to automate the tax compliance, but they do have the need to have up-to-date and accurate research utilities available to them for tax decisions. And then even the customers that are outsourcing or automating their tax compliance, they are using this tool to make good tax decisions so that when they build out their tax matrix, they have all the right rules, all the right product classifications. So this is something that Avalara has, and we've got customers in the Fortune 100 using this, and then we have smaller companies using it too, just because it has a tremendous amount of data available that's very easy to find, and you're not relying on whatever the top hit from Google was. Exemption certificate management I touched on before. This is probably what is most important to customers in the manufacturing and distribution space. So when you think about a customer, when you add them to your database, if you add them as a tax exempt customer, what you're doing is you're telling your software not to charge them tax. But the tax is interesting because tax is owed by the business, but it's a pass-through tax. So you're allowed to pass it on to your consumer, right? So that's what's kind of unique about it, is that it's a rare case where you owe a tax, but you're allowed to ask somebody else to pay for it. But ultimately, if you ask them for the wrong amount, or if you tell them that they don't have to pay it, but they really did, then the problem we run into is that the business is now responsible for it if that's found out in an audit. So making sure that that process is accurate is very essential to a successful strategy. And candidly, many companies, when they are faced in an audit, the first place that's checked is exemption certificates, because candidly, they're often ignored. If you set up a new customer in the database and you collect an exemption certificate and you file it, whether you file it digitally or in a file cabinet or a cardboard banker's box, and then never look at it again, you're not paying attention to whether or not that is valid. You're not paying attention to whether or not they provided an exemption for a certain product segment, and over time, they started buying a different product segment. There's different ways that they can become invalid. And in some states, Florida is one that comes to mind, they have to be renewed every year. So it's just an easy thing to not do, is to make sure that those are accurate. So Avalara's ECM Pro software has the ability to request electronically the exemption document from the customer and retrieve that electronically so that they're not having to, actually ask them to fax them a form or email them a form. Store it in the system, it marks the customer exempt, and it puts an expiration date if there is one, so that if the the exemption expires, then the system will just automatically charge tax again, which obviously will create a customer interaction to resolve that problem. There's also, without getting too much into the weeds, the ability to send out notifications in advance so this can be updated before that happens. So if it's something that you guys are handling manually today and would like to learn more, we'd love to talk more about the solution and how it can help ease the burden of compliance. AvaTax, again, this is kind of the heartbeat of our solution. It was the first thing we brought to market. It's what calculates all the rates. So if you are charging tax to customers, if you have an e-commerce store of any kind and you're selling direct to consumer these days, and you're shipping all over the country, this can really make the whole job much easier and much simpler to manage. And then manage returns, right? So when you're done with that whole process, you've collected all the tax. If you're in a lot of states, especially if after exploring South Dakota versus Wayfair exposure, you find that you have exposure in many, many states. Each state has its own idea of when you should pay them. Some of them say you should pay us every month. Some say quarterly, some say annually. But bottom line is they all need to be paid on time. And so maintaining that calendar, making sure the forms are filled out correctly on time, and getting all that content submitted and paid by the deadline for all of them can be very, very time consuming. You also get the notices, right? The states send the notice and they say, hey, we think there's an error in this one, so we need you to research it. All that process when you work with Avalara is taken off your plate and managed by our team. And then I touched on this before. I won't go into too much more detail, but effectively e-invoicing is starting to gain a lot of headwind in the tailwind, I guess you should say, in Europe. Don't have dates yet where it's coming to the US. I just can't see how it wouldn't be, because it gets money in the hands of the government faster. And ultimately that's what their goal is to collect these funds. So, but e-invoicing again is the notion of having a business transaction report the transaction immediately and collect those documents electronically and file them all electronically at the point of transaction. And then this, I'm going to click through here and just bring everything up. This is kind of how our solution works. You know, we have our tax research, and that team is constantly updating all those rates and rules and updating our database. And that database kind of sits at the core of our solution, and everything else can look at that and talk to it. And then when you move over to exemption management, right, you're going to set up your customers as either exempt or not, based on the storage of the certificate. And then when you look at the tax determination system, it's going to look over at exemption management, and it's going to ask, basically as it goes through this process, it's going to ask itself 3 questions. Is this customer exempt? And it's going to look at exemption management to figure that out. Is the customer exempt? If the answer is no, they are not exempt, then it moves on to question 2, which is this shipping location exempt? So it's going to look at our database and go, well, is the location we're sending this product tax-free? Oregon, New Hampshire, et cetera, some places don't have tax. If the answer is no, there's no exemption for that, there is still tax owed, then it's going to say, is this product taxable? And this product, again, maybe it's a football and it's taxable, maybe it's a gallon of milk and it's not taxable, but it's going to ask that question. And then ultimately, it's going to deliver that result right to your invoice with the correct amount. And it does that in a fraction of a second. It's a snap of a finger or a blink of an eye. It happens really, really fast. And then all that information is stored in our system, and then the reports are used to generate and file tax returns on your behalf. And something just to keep in mind is that you don't have to buy all of this. If you want to explore Avalara, you don't have to have the entire thing, but that's kind of what the whole solution looks like when you see it kind of working together. Rounding third here, guys, just a couple of screenshots of Avalara in Cloud Suite. As you can see, the screen doesn't look any different. You see the screen like you always would. And when we go to the second one here, you can see there's a tax detail. And when you look at the actual tax detail, you can see the different jurisdictions have been broken out, and it's delivering the tax rate based on all these rules. So effectively what happens is today you have a tax matrix or table of some kind within Cloud Suite that you maintain. You go in there and you say, all right, well, here's all of our products, and here's the tax rate that it should be charged if it's a taxable customer. And then you have to go in there periodically and update those rates and all those rules, and as you add new products, that sort of thing. The difference is that instead of it looking at its internal tax table that's in Cloud Suite, it just makes a web called Avalara. And through that integration that's been developed, it says, here's what I'm selling, here's who I'm selling it to, here's where I'm selling it, what's the tax rate? And Avalara returns that response with the latest, most accurate information. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. If you paid attention to that whole thing, I commend you. I talked kind of fast, sorry about that. But if you do have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
You actually have one. How does Avalara connect to e-commerce sites? Does the sales tax calculation go through the ERP to Avalara and then back to the e-com site, or is it a direct connection from the website to Avalara?
Well, this is the worst answer that I have to use a lot, but it depends, right? So everybody's ecosystem set up differently, but effectively the way e-commerce normally works is e-commerce is going to connect to Avalara because you're going to need that tax determination in the shopping cart for the customer to make the purchase. And then it's going to feed through your integration from the e-commerce to ERP. Some companies have that get recalculated, some of them don't. That's why I say it depends. But ultimately, we connect to, I mean, I hate to use the word gajillion, but I think that's about how many e-commerce integrations we have. We have over 1,200 integrations to different ERPs and shopping cart integrations. So odds are, if you're using one that you didn't build yourself, there's already an integration built. So hope that answers your question.
Okay, yeah, we do have another one too. What do you see going forward in terms of economic nexus?
Well, the one thing that's interesting with economic nexus is that it's been anything but static. So, you know, the South Dakota Wayfair ruling that I mentioned, it became a law in 2018. By the end of the following year, almost every state had come on board, and at this point, all states that have a sales tax have an economic nexus law in the books. So now what we're seeing a little bit of is some shifting in what the thresholds are. So California, New York, and Texas all are $500,000 in sales before they make you register and file. They're big states, they have a lot of big businesses in them, and that's what they decided made sense for them. When the first thing first rolled out, Kansas said $1. If you're going to ship a single product into our state, you're going to need to register and file taxes. And then after about a year of that, they realized that that was creating basically they were discouraging businesses from shipping into Kansas because it just wasn't worth the trouble. So then they adopted the $100,000 threshold. The standard threshold that was in the ruling was $100,000 or 200 transactions. We've seen a couple states drop the through 200 transactions number. So here's the thing with it. It's kind of the great and bad thing about the United States is we've got 50 unique kingdoms that get to make up their own rules. And it's one of the things that's made our country great, but it also makes it very complicated. And so I see these things continuing to shift over time, just as states kind of learn what works best for their business climate. But as it is, there are multiple different rules already in place that you have to stay on top
of. All right, so we have one more. How difficult is automation to implement and set up?
You know what? It depends. Depends on how complicated your current business processes are, but the integration's already built and it's already actually native within Cloud Suite Distribution. It's not the case with some of the on-premise versions of the software, but we've got customers already using them, so we're pretty comfortable with how the process works. Essentially, what needs to happen on your side is you have to tell us what your products are and tie those to tax codes. We have these internal codes that are tied to product types, but we don't know what you sell. So you have to say, well, this is what we sell and tie them to these tax codes. And then once that's all set up, it pretty much takes care of itself, at that point. So, we tell people expect it to take about 3 months to set up. It has a lot to do with the bandwidth that our customers have to kind of go through and map all those tax codes, but actually turning on the integration isn't terribly difficult.
All right. That is all the questions. And once again, thank you to everybody who made a point to attend today's webinar with us, Action, and Evan and the Avalara team. If you have any questions or things that you think we may have missed, this webinar will be recorded. So you can reach out, you click on action.com for the video or our YouTube, and you can watch that at your very own convenience and get all your questions answered. Any other questions, you can contact me, Jason Nackstead. My email's up on the screen. That's JKNACKSTEDT@action.com. Contact us to schedule a discussion about the benefits of Avalara and integrating with your Infor ERP to take your business to a winning season with Avalara's suite of tax compliance solutions. Once again, Evan, thank you very much. Rich, if you're listening, I hope you feel better. And everybody else, thank you for attending. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Evan. Have a nice day.